We ended last lesson with the query on the screen, talking about the and or logical operators that allow us to create some additional complexity to our where clause. Instead of just saying, show me all rows where the marital status equals S, we can say, show me all rows where the marital status equals S and the gender equals M. So it allows us to create what are known as conjunctions for and operations or disjunctions for or operations. Suppose we want more than two criteria in our where clause, and we want to combine the different operators. So I want to use both an and an or logical operator in this query. How is that going to affect the evaluation? Let's just do an example. So let's say where marital status equals S and gender equals M, or organization level equals 4. When I run that by pressing F5, you'll notice that we have some rows where the organization level is not 4. What's actually happening here is the AND operation, or the AND operator, the conjunction, is taking precedence and is being evaluated first. So just like with order of operations in mathematical expressions, SQL applies order of operations to Boolean logic or Boolean expressions, which this where clause creates with multiple and or operators. So what we really have is, I'm going to use the parentheses to make it clear, we have this statement. So what SQL is doing is it's saying, okay, for every row, I'm going to evaluate first, is the marital status S and the gender M? If so, great. It doesn't matter if the organization level is not 4, because with the disjunction, or with an or operator, as long as one of the clauses is true, the whole row or the whole expression is true. So that's why in these scenarios where the organization level is not 4, by looking at the top 2 rows here, we'll notice that S and M are the marital status and gender, which has to be based on how this criteria is set up. But let's look at the organization level being 4. SQL is still saying, is the marital status S and is the gender M? For this row, this particular expression is going to evaluate to false. However, because the organization level equals 4, and again with the disjunction, as long as one of the clauses, one of the operations evaluates to true, then the whole expression evaluates to true. So despite the fact that for this row number 3, the marital status is S, but the gender is F. So this expression evaluates to false. But since the organization level equals 4, which I see down there, the row is returned because the expression evaluates to true. So this is getting into something called predicate logic or symbolic logic. Usually in a lot of computer science and mathematics programs at colleges and universities, it's often required for students to take this course so that they understand how different Boolean expressions and logical expressions can combine so that they can evaluate to either true or false depending on what they're really intending. We just want to be aware of it because if we start writing a bunch of where clauses or a bunch of criteria within our where clause and we don't specify parentheses or we don't intuitively know how SQL is going to evaluate, it's going to be very difficult for us to determine whether or not we accurately wrote our SQL statement. If I didn't know that using these parentheses, this was how SQL is going to evaluate this clause or this statement, by just writing this, I may not be sure that I'm returning what I want. Going along with the parentheses and adding on that, what if I were to do this? If I force SQL to say, I want to evaluate this disjunction first, and then using the AND operator, I want to evaluate it versus the marital status equals S. So if the gender is M or the organization level is 4, I want this particular parenthetical expression to evaluate to true. So the gender could be F, but the organization level equaling 4 would make this operation or this expression true. In that scenario, as long as the marital status equaled S, then the row would be returned because, again, with a conjunction or the AND operator, both sides of the expression have to evaluate to true, or else the whole expression is false. There's something called truth tables, which I've included as one of the worksheets that you can take a look at as you're going along and reviewing this lesson, which will help visually represent what's happening with disjunctions, conjunctions, and then when you combine them together. The big takeaway I want you to get from this lesson is that we can use parentheses to force SQL to evaluate certain Boolean expressions first. So in this particular example now, I've forced the gender equaling M or organization level equal 4 to be the first Boolean expression evaluated. Now when I run this, you'll notice I still have the old result up, so 225 rows. When I run this, it now changes to 127 rows. Now why? Okay, the organization level equals 4. Okay, so the gender must be M for this particular disjunction to evaluate to true. And that's the case. Now in order for the conjunction, or the whole expression here, to evaluate to true, the marital status must also equal S. And that's the case. So that is why this row is returned. In this particular example, in the second row, the organization level equals 3. Okay, so the gender must be M, which it is, which forces this particular Boolean expression to become true. And now for the whole conjunction to become true, the marital status has to be S, which it is. And then the third row, this will be the last one we look at, the organization level equals 4. So it doesn't matter whether the gender is M or F. Does not matter. In this particular example, it's F. It could be M. Because as long as one of these, organization level equal 4, or gender equal M, is true, this whole disjunction is true. Once the disjunction is true, the marital status must equal S, which forces the entire clause, or the entire expression, to be true. Hence, that's why this row is returned. You're never going to see a row in our result set based on this query with a marital status of M, which we can look at down in the results panel. If the marital status were M, then the first clause of the conjunction is false. If any one of the conjunction clauses is false, the entire statement is false. So that's why we're never going to see a marital status equaling M in our results panel for this particular query. Take a look at the worksheet, which will explain a little bit more about symbolic logic and truth tables or predicate logic, whatever you know it as. And there's some practice problems that'll help you understand exactly what's going on and complete a few examples of truth tables, which will help reinforce the concepts that we just discussed in this lesson.